Thank you. Thank you. Oh, man. Boy, you sound really good when other people talk. I was thinking about it. Here it is, 2024. I think this is my 25th connection in a row. And this is one of the things I look forward to, and I just love to do every year. And several months ago, when Pastor Randy had asked me if I would come and speak, I said sure. And then over the months, you just get really insecure, like who am I, and what do I have to share? But I did feel a little bit better when I walked into the hotel and I saw the two signs, because my feelings of being unqualified went away when I realized I am definitely not been asked to speak at the spelling bee. That is not where I'm at. I am much more qualified in here than I am over there. That made me feel just infinitely better. But let me tell you one other thing too. Peter just joked about the Gettysburg Address, and I had a pretty amazing, significant moment in my life a couple months ago. Here's some real heroes, some friends of mine. If you put this picture up, this is Pastor Nate and Dacia in Callander, Scotland. They're sitting right over here, and I had, give them a hand. They just became missionaries and starting a church in Scotland. And I was able to visit them just back in February as they were being installed in a church in just about a year in Scotland, which is unheard of if you kind of know how things happen there. And as I was walking into the installation service, these three older folks, two ladies and a gentleman, said, "Oh, are you the pastor that's going to give us the Gettysburg Address today?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." And we pastor in a pretty small town, but I say it's one of the largest small towns in the world. And you may not be super familiar with it, but it was pretty significant in the midst of the Civil War that was taking place in our country. And it has a significant place, and God is doing something great there. But it is so good to be with you. In the spirit of the Gettysburg Address, if you're not familiar, I know we have people here from different nations and different places, but it was famous that Abraham Lincoln gave about a 2-minute address following the governor of Pennsylvania, who spoke for about 2 hours. And he started by saying 77 years ago. And I couldn't help but think about this as I was preparing for my message, and I'm not making this up. 77 years ago, my grandmother Hilda entered into Life Bible College. Here's a picture of her. She graduated in 1940. 60 years later, I graduated from Life Pacific University in 2000. And there's a heritage that I am so grateful for and so thankful for. And so it is such an honor to be here to address you. I'm one of you. I'm a Foursquare pastor, and I've loved being a Foursquare pastor. And I believe I'll be a Foursquare pastor until the day I die. I'm thankful for the call that God has in my life. And I want to talk to us tonight about being faithful to our calling. And I'd like to start by reading Psalm 56. And so just follow along with me as we read this tonight. Be gracious to me, God, for man tramples me. He fights and oppresses me all day long. My adversaries trample me all day long, for many arrogantly fight against me. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I will not fear. What can man do to me? They twist my words all day long. All their thoughts against me are evil. They stir up strife, they lurk, they watch my steps while they wait to take my life. Will they escape in spite of such sin? God, bring down the nations in wrath. You yourself have recorded my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your records? Then my enemies will retreat on the day when I call. This I know, God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust, I will not fear. What can man do to me? I am obligated by vows to you, God. I will make my thank offerings to you, for you have delivered me from death, even my feet from stumbling, to walk before God in the light of life. David asked the question, what can man do to me? Well, let's be honest, he can do quite a bit, can he? We moved to Gettysburg, we were there 12 days, and someone ran a stop sign right in front of us, and we hit him doing about 55, 60 miles an hour. I blanked out. My wife blanked out. We ended up in a field. Our dog had gotten thrown from the car. We had no place to live. We just moved there from the West Coast. I'm laying in the hospital, dazed and confused, and I asked because I saw the young man being helped out of the truck after we hit him and asked, is he okay? Is he going to make it? Is there something wrong with him? And they said, no, he's going to be okay. And I just asked a little information. I was surprised they told me his name. No joke, Jesus. We always said that we were going to make an impact for Jesus when we moved to Gettysburg. Just didn't literally think we were going to impact Jesus in Gettysburg. Psalm 56 is one of those psalms where David is just kind of talking about the whiplash, the dazed and confused of life. He was minding his own business, a little shepherd boy. He shows up at the battlefield, and through his own courage and faith, they sign him up to go and take out Goliath, and he does, and his popularity puts a mark on his back. Pretty soon, the king Saul is chasing him out of his own nation, and he writes Psalm 56 from the land of his arch enemies, the Philistines. He'd already been driven from his homeland, and now he's sitting the Philistines, and they're after him. And David is just like, where do I go? Where do I turn? Everywhere I go, people are against me. And he writes the words in 1 Samuel 21, David was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath, so he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. I have to admit, reflecting on this, I wondered why I didn't maybe employ that strategy a few times over the last few years of just trying to be insane, and maybe my counsel would send me, to some nice place in Hawaii to make myself feel better for a couple years. I don't think I'm the only one that thought about that, though, because it seems to get harder and harder to get an appointment with Paul Kuzma at CSR. I don't know. But all jokes aside, I bet you, like me, have felt like going insane a few times over the last several years. I think every pastor and leader, and not just pastors, but leaders can relate to David's prayer. Just to say part of that again, be gracious to me, God, because I feel that man is trampling me. He is fighting and oppressing me, it feels like, all day long. My adversaries trample me and they arrogantly fight against me. They twist my words all day long. All their thoughts against me are evil. Anybody feel like your words have been twisted against you? They stir up strife, they lurk, they watch for my steps. It's like they're waiting to take my life. And what I really want to talk about is what I feel is some of the new pressures that have been placed on the pastor and leader. Things that we didn't get in Bible college, things in seminary. You didn't take a class on COVID. Anybody? Maybe they're doing that now. That'd be wise, on COVID restrictions. I had no mention in a single class of critical race theory, gender fluidity, how artificial intelligence is going to affect things. I didn't have to think about necessarily the perfect answer of, is it Israel, is it Gaza? There is so much pressure on us who speak and lead to feel like there's an answer to give, an answer that's going to help, an answer that's going to fix something. I remember during the height of COVID one time, and this is, Peter talked about my personality. I've got some energy. And I like people, and I like hanging around with people. Sunday mornings, I love them. Even if I'm not speaking, I love them. I love greeting people. I love seeing everybody. And I remember several times in between our services going up to my office and just sitting there. Because I was just like, God, I don't know. I feel like every time I'm getting up, making a decision, it's causing a problem. It's causing a division. What do I do? And I caught myself just wanting to hide. Just wanting to get away. I'd never feared my church before and feared what may be said and twisted in the wrong way. I didn't sign up for this. And then I remember sitting there and remember David's words in Psalm 56. I may not know anything, but I know this, God is for me. I may not know anything, but I know that God is for me. And I sat there on a number of occasions just crying, saying, thank you, God, that you are for me. And that is enough to keep me going. As I realized how much I didn't know, this became such an anchor in my life. And let me tell you how important it is right now. I want to show you a few stats. I'm not crazy about stats sometimes because they can make us feel a little depressed, but Barna Research just came out with some just recently. talking about what pastors are experiencing the most in loneliness and isolation and emotional or mental exhaustion. 27% frequently, 46% sometimes. 22% of us frequently feel isolated from others. I felt that temptation, just wanting to go to my office, just be easier to just kind of be by myself. I'm not the introvert, I'm the extrovert. 33% sometimes feeling isolated. 12% not as high, feeling lonely, but 42% of us sometimes feeling lonely. I think we have one more slide here. Pastors have less certainty that their congregates consider them a trustworthy source of wisdom. We feel that way, don't we, as pastors? I don't trust you. There's not many things I trust. 2020, 67% said, yeah, I think most people in my church trust me. 2022, 58. 2023, 56. We feel exhausted, we feel lonely, we feel less trusted. But my first simple point for you tonight is to know that God is for you. I had the honor of giving the commitment speech at Life in 2000, and it came back to my mind as I was preparing this that I told our graduating seniors that God does not have a plan for your life. You are God's plan. You are His plan. Daniel Brown, great mentor of ours, always used to say, right? God is not using you to get ministry done. He's using ministry to get you done. And so God's not just looking if you can't cut it, if you're not good enough to find somebody else to get the ministry done in your town. No. He's using your town and the people in your church and the difficulties, these things you're doing to get you done. You're His plan. He uses you. He uses people. Now, there's some encouraging news that came out. Let's look at something that's encouraging from Barna. Have you given real serious consideration to quitting being in full-time ministry within the last year? We were peaking just a year and a half ago. 42% of us saying that I'm regularly considering quitting in ministry, and that's dropped this last fall to 33%, and I'm so thankful for that. But I do, even though this is encouraging, want to bring back a story or something that took place not long after COVID that came back to my mind recently. I remember watching something on Zoom. Everything was on Zoom, and it was early April of 2020. And Pastor Tim Keller, pastored a church. He's now passed away, but he pastored a great church in New York City. And he was talking about resilience and burnout. And he was mentioning that after 9/11, he was pastoring in New York, in downtown New York. His church was all around in New York City. And he received a call a few months after 9/11 happened from a pastor who said, hey, Tim, you don't know me. I think he was a Presbyterian pastor, but he said, listen, what I want you to know is that I pastor a church, and I pastored here for a couple decades in Oklahoma City. And he said, I was pastoring here after the bomb went off and took out the majority of the federal building in Oklahoma City. And he said, I just want to let you know our experience. He said, we worked hard. We served our city. We loved people. We cared for them. We met their needs. And he said, we felt like we were doing good. And after 2 or 3 years, we felt like, things had been shifting. They were moving back in the right direction. And he said, all of a sudden, we started realizing after year 3 and year 4 and on that the lives of their staff and their leaders began to fall apart because they had been completely exhausted for so many years. I remember Tim Keller saying, you know what? I wish that we had taken that more to heart after 9/11. But he said the same thing happened to me and to our church. After 4 and 5 years, we started to really see the toll that took place on our lives as leaders because of everything we've been through. You probably have already done the math. We're at year 4 and 5 coming up. And by the way, there's like a little election that's taking place this fall. Leaders, how are we doing? In order for us to finish well, is going to require us in this moment to recognize and deal with the parts of us that are currently not well. Have we recognized and dealt with the pressure that we've been under so we don't explode or implode? 2 great leaders in the Bible failed to finish well, and they have discipled me really well in this season over the last several years. The first is Moses. Nobody understands the pressures of leaders and what we have faced over the last 4+, even beyond that years, than Moses. Does anybody? I mean, his leadership was constantly challenged. They blamed him for everything. This wasn't our idea. This was your dumb idea, Moses. It was so wonderful back in Egypt, right? The leeks and the melons, and I mean, where did they come up with that? This wasn't our idea, this was your idea. They tried regularly to replace him. Anybody? What makes you so special? Anybody can do this. And you're like, yeah, sure. So the context comes when he has his slip up in Numbers 20. The Israelites arrived at the desert in Kadesh, and the people gathered there in opposition to Moses and Aaron, it says. Let me read this to you in verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together, speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, so kindly and sweetly, listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock? And Moses raised his arm, struck the rock twice with his staff. You know the story. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. Moses seems to snap in frustration in dramatic fashion. You rebels. Everybody had a few of those moments in ministry you are just not proud of. Or moments on social media you wish you could take back. Was he just sick? I mean, he's been facing opposition. This is the third major time, but he's been facing opposition since the very beginning. What is it now about his challenge to leadership, his abilities, his motives? What was it that kind of just broke and snapped in him? They've wanted to replace him before. Why did he lose it this time? And I will tell you, I noticed something, and I think I only noticed it because of the loss of people in our church of just dying physically, the loss of people that have left our church, the people who have broken off relationship. And I don't think I noticed this before, but I noticed it now. How it started in Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. It says the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert. Then it says this, Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. His sister died. His sister, who was the one who protected him, stuck him in the basket, then went and cared for him and convinced the Pharaoh to allow his mom to raise him. Even though she had come against him at different times, we've seen in Scripture, Miriam, his family, she's close to him. So he's already been going through opposition. He's already been going through this for a long time. Then he loses his sister. And then right after that, there's needs upon needs, and then there's opposition. And I just wonder if Moses just didn't have the emotional tank to handle it anymore. And he was in the midst of grieving her and the loss. And the people gathered in opposition, and he couldn't take it this time. The result, not just a little mistake. The Lord said, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I gave them. The way I see that, Moses, instead of lifting me up in the sight of the Israelites, you lifted yourself up. I get it. Boy, when you've been beaten down and attacked, you just want to make yourself look respectable, like you know what you're doing. You made yourself look impressive, Moses, instead of me. Never draw attention to yourself or to ourselves, but we always want to draw attention to Jesus, don't we? Nobody benefits by someone becoming more impressed with me. I will just tell you that right now. Your life will not be changed. Nobody in my church benefits by becoming more impressed with me. No one in my family benefits by becoming more impressed with me. The greatest joy and the greatest thing that we have is to tell people that I'm impressed with Jesus and that he's the only thing to be impressed with. And don't put your eyes on anything else but him. My family should see, Dad doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have answers. He turns to Jesus. The church should look and say, that pastor, he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. What is he doing? He's turning to Jesus. They should think that we are just desperately relying on him. Not trying to make it look like we can provide and fix it, but I just know where to go. I know where to go. The priority of a leader is for those following me to become impressed with Jesus. But boy, is it hard right now. This pressure to impress, to know what to say, to know what to do, to know how to lead it. Man, it can get us into big trouble. By the way, I don't know. I think you could make the argument that Moses broke all three of the first three commandments at once. He placed himself before God in front of his people. He made himself out to be kind of like God, and he kind of spoke for God. I'll bring water out of this rock. I think we break those commandments whenever we try to get people impressed with us. Australian pastor and author, maybe you've heard of him, Mark Sayre. He's written several great books. We wrote a book not long ago on the era of anxiety. And that was really good. Pastor Randy passed it out to some of us, but I was listening to a podcast several months ago, and he said, I think we're shifting from an era of anxiety to an era of anger. Woo! All right. Wonderful. If you don't know this is the year of democracy. I think this is perhaps the most elections will take place this year than any time in history, and that's wonderful. But if Mark Sayre is right, and we don't know if he is, but he says that anger, this year will be marked by anger and protest. He says it doesn't matter who gets in, everybody's just going to be angry with the incumbent. I told Randy the other day, I'm sorry, I don't know how it's going to go tomorrow, but it probably doesn't matter. Some of you are just picking up on that. We're voting for, okay, yeah. Anger is often the pressure release valve of our hearts and souls, and it hides the real issues. If people are giving way to anger, if this is really the case, we better be careful as pastors and leaders that we don't have a bunch of anger just lying below the surface too. I know this, we better not be bottled up. I remember one night a few years ago, trying to write a message for a Sunday, and it was just one of those weeks, we've all been there, right? It's not coming together. I've got nothing. It's Saturday night, and I'm starting to get angry because I'm telling God that his reputation is on the line that I speak really well tomorrow. Really, we convince ourselves. And I'm telling him, I need something, God, and I'll never forget, I finally just really was honest with him, and I said, do you even know how mad I am at you right now because you've given me nothing? Do you know how mad I am? And you know what God told me? Oh, so clear. He said, yep, but you don't. And he exposed a lot of anger inside of me because I expected God to do things for me. And he was just exposing where my heart goes when I feel the pressure. Oh, Mark, I know how mad you are. You don't know how mad you are. Pastor, leader, are you angry? Do you have unresolved anger with people in your church? People who have left? With our denomination? With God? I think we need to deal with that so that we don't try to step into the place of God and do like so many leaders have done that grieve my heart, that do things out of anger and wrong motives and manipulate people and make them think that this is who God is and he's not. You know the scariest part of it was? It worked, right? He struck the rock twice and it worked. But I feel like the Lord wanted me to share this with some of you because this is mercy and grace. I really believe this. After the first time striking the rock, because he had done that before and the water flowed, I just wonder if when he struck it once, God was giving Moses a chance to go, yeah, it didn't work. Don't do it again, Moses. And he pressed through and struck it again. And I believe that God really, for some of you, really wants to speak to your hearts tonight and say, yeah, you've struck it, you've lashed out. Don't do it again. Don't do it again. Listen to my voice. Soften your heart towards those who have made you angry. Release that anger. Second person, Elijah. Boy, he had a short tenure as a prophet. We're all aware of the incredible story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, right? I've been there many times. When we visited Israel, it's incredible. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, stones, pouring water on it. It's so dramatic. Nobody watches that show Survivor but my wife and I. But that's what it was, like the ultimate Survivor challenge. And then it says, fire from the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. It's incredible. Elijah kills on all the false prophets, tells Ahab, go and eat and drink. The sound of heavy rain is here. On the outside, it looked like a huge success. But we know on the inside it wasn't a success for Elijah, was it? His dramatic showdown worked, listen, for everyone but him. The people all said, Yahweh is God, the Lord is God. He's the one still struggling. Next thing, Jezebel threatens him, and he is afraid, and he runs for his life. And we see there in 1 Kings 18:4, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. And then he laid down under the bush, and he fell asleep. I quit. That was the title of an email from Pete Scazzaro, who we probably know real well, a couple of days ago. I quit. I haven't read it yet, but I was like, yeah, we've been there. How did Elijah, after such an amazing moment, get to a point of, I quit? Well, 1 Kings 18:1 may give us a little clue, just like the beginning of the story for Moses. It said this, after a long time in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. A couple verses later, when Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, O troubler of Israel? And Elijah answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have. And then he said, gather everyone together. We're going to do a showdown. Ahab hit a nerve with Elijah. I think it's interesting that he calls him out, you troubler of Israel, and Elijah's response isn't just to stay focused on what God wanted him to do. He starts name calling him back. I mean, it's like every van ride with our children. Like, you said this to me, and I said that to you. And it's because he hit a nerve. And I wonder, Elijah, what exactly are you doing? Because God told you to go and stand before Ahab and say it's going to rain. That's all God told him to do, right? Go find Ahab and tell him it's going to rain. And where do we find ourselves in 1 Kings 18? Oh, go get everybody because I'm going to show you. Where does that come from? Seems like he's taking what God wants him to do and trying to use it to prove something or maybe prove himself. And boy, there's that little phrase at the beginning of 1 Kings 18, 4 words, after a long time. Oh, those words are difficult words. After a long time, you can go back sometime and look because the after a long time comes after 1 Kings chapter 17 at the very end when he raises a boy from the dead and he presents him and everyone says, you are the prophet, the man of God. And there's this great moment of faith. And then we come to 1 Kings 18 and we just read it as the next chapter. But what Elijah was doing was he went through a long time when there was a drought of rain, but unless, the Bible doesn't tell us, but unless it happened and it just wasn't recorded, that was the last time that there was a miracle, anything that took place in his ministry. And I wonder if Elijah just started wondering if he was just a failure because no one in Israel was following God and he hadn't seen success or fruit in his ministry in a long time. And he shows up and somebody pricks a nerve with him, you trouble of Israel, and he responds, maybe, out of that insecurity, who do you think you are? I mean, have you ever noticed how many times Elisha claimed to be the only one, even though he knew that was a lie? I mean, come on, Obadiah just met him. And Obadiah said, I hid a whole bunch, hundreds of prophets. And Elijah keeps sharing the narrative. I'm the only one. I'm the only one. Sounds like a song from Frozen. All right, sorry, I have a young daughter. He claims to be the only one. He tells everyone, and it's like he's wanting to soften the failure that maybe he's feeling inside with an excuse. Pastors, anyone? You know, we usually have more people in church, but it was a really sunny weekend. And then the next weekend, you know, we usually have more people here, but it's raining, you know, and people don't come out when it's raining. It's those people in their sports these days. I mean, they're not committed. Anybody still mentioning pre-COVID numbers? When we get codependent on the response of people, on the fruit of our ministry to our own value and worth, it gets really hard when people expose the failure that maybe we've been. After a long time, it hadn't rained in Israel, but according to the record, after a long time, not much had happened in Elijah's ministry either. And I just wonder if he wanted to do more than just tell Ahab it was going to rain, but he wanted to do something that would validate himself and his ministry again. Is it possible that Elijah was feeling like a failure? I think it is, but I know this. This we can see clearly from Scripture. Elijah, listen, was giving up and quitting because his ministry didn't live up to his expectations. He said, nobody's listening. Not true. They all just did. But he said, no one's listening. Because just like we can do a great service or a great ministry, and someone's life gets changed, and one person gets saved, but our expectations was, oh, there's going to be a lot of people here, and the altars are going to be full, and we see someone's life get changed, and we look over that and consider it a failure because we're looking for the results to validate us. And Elijah was giving up and quitting, not because God said you failed, Elijah, not because you blew it. He said, God, well, it's not working. I'm no better than my ancestors. And maybe that's why Elijah prays in verse 36, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, listen, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Oof. I just know there's a fine line in my heart between praying that God blesses my ministry for his sake versus my sake. God, show up and do something amazing and prove yourself to be God. And while you're at it, prove that I am actually doing what you've asked me to do and things are going well. He sounds like Gideon, doesn't he? The sword of the Lord, and then all of a sudden, Gideon, why are you throwing your name in there? Because sometimes when we get all attached to it, it's really hard to not get our value and our identity connected to it. If the enemy, listen, can't derail you or disqualify you, his next best option is to convince you to quit. That's the stats we just saw a moment ago. To convince you that you're a failure, to give up because you're not making any difference. The ultimate temptation, I believe, is for you to start questioning your calling. I want to go back to one more here, stat from Barna. At any time during your tenure in ministry, have you personally gone through a period where you have significantly doubted your calling as a pastor or minister? This is the one stat that's not heading in the right direction. 2023, 60%. 60% of us are doubting whether we've been called. Can I humbly submit to you, just as we look at the story of Elijah, are we doubting our calling because we're unsure that God really spoke to us to go into ministry, or are we doubting our calling because our expectations are not being met, our own? I heard someone say, because the vast majority of those that are questioning their calling today are pastors 45 years old and under, and I'm just over that. Whew. You know what took place 20-something years ago, around that time where people at 45 would enter into ministry? It was the height of big conferences that took place here in the United States called Promise Keepers. Then there was things like Passion and Acquire the Fire and all kinds of different things. And I heard this person on the podcast say, I just wonder if some of us as leaders who have been called into ministry over the last 20, 25 years, were called in these huge conferences where worship is incredible and everybody's following God and they're worshiping and we're like, I want to do this forever. And then we get into ministry and we're ministering to people as they die, as they are in their funerals. We're getting people that speak things against us and come against us, and we're like, I don't think I'm called. And maybe it was just a false illusion of what we thought we were being called to. It was still a call, but it's not to what we see in those big conferences. I don't know, but I wonder. You know, the other big stat as pastors that are 45 and under, but it's also the highest percentage of people questioning their calling are you lady pastors, female pastors. Makes me feel almost the same way, or I wonder for you. Did you get a call of God on your life? You know what? I can do this. Doesn't matter what anybody says. I can pastor this church. I can do this. And then you got into it, and then you really started to face opposition from people because of your gender. And so instead of just thinking, oh, I'm just not working out, or maybe you start questioning your calling because of the reactions of other people, or maybe the lack thereof. Let's not let a season of drought, of difficulty, of unmet expectations cause us to start questioning our calling, church. Let's go back to David and notice how he finishes tonight. Verse 10 through 12 there in Psalm 56, he says, I am obligated by vows to you, God, and I will make my thanksgiving sacrifices to you. For you rescued me from death, even my feet from stumbling, to walk before God in the light of life. I think David says two really strong things in the midst of his being dazed and confused and being hurt in the midst of his life. I know this, that God is for me. And then he recites, as he oftentimes does at the end of one of his Psalms, man, God, you have rescued me from death. You have kept my feet from stumbling. I'm going to walk before you. But I love what he says is that I am obligated by my vows to you, O God. It's like he's saying, I know, God, that you have a calling on my life. I'm not supposed to run away to the land of the Philistines. I'm not supposed to just tuck and run and hide because things have not gone well. You've done something in my life, and I vowed to follow you and to trust you and to be the person you've called me to be, and I will remain obligated to those vows, O God. Do you remember when God called you into ministry? I do. God called me 28 years ago. Pastor Ken Sweat in Modesto, California, asked me to fill in as a youth leader until June of 1996. And I'm still here. Because as Dave Veach used to say, nothing is more permanent than something done temporarily in ministry. Can you fill in until June, 6 months? And somehow here I am still today. But I'm still here because not too long after that and starting to lead that youth ministry, I knew that God had called me. I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And even when it gets hard, especially over the last 5 to 8 years, I've always felt like Peter when Jesus asked, are you going to leave me too? And he responded, where am I going to go? Where else am I going to go? God, you've called me. What else am I going to do? It's not just the normal joke that I have nothing else to do but be a greeter at Costco. I mean, it's just, I don't want to do anything else even though it's hard. You've called me. I said yes when you called me even though I want to do something else at other times. I know I can't. We are all here, pastors and leaders, because God has called us and we responded. We said yes to Him. Not even, I say this respectfully, we aren't called to the people in our church. I'm not primarily called to them. I'm not called to my community before I'm called to God to do what He's called me to do. If I'm called to them first, then their reactions and the fruit that happens there will dictate what I do and how I feel about myself. I am first and foremost called because Jesus called me to come and follow Him and serve Him. Moses and Elijah remind us that God isn't looking for heroes or saviors. We already have Jesus. I think we're supposed to be like John the Baptist personally, who said in John 3, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I am just sent ahead of Him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater, and I must become less. You know when John the Baptist said that is when someone came to him, just like they were in a way opposing Moses and just like they were saying stuff to Elijah. They said, hey, John, do you notice how many people left to go follow Jesus? And if there was something in John that was in competition, something in him that was upset at people because of what they pointed out or what they do, you would have seen a response. But what is John's response? It is so beautiful. He said, oh my gosh, I'm here because of the bridegroom, and the bride belongs to him. And it is my joy to just serve the bridegroom. I want to see the bride come and to know the bridegroom. But listen, the bride belongs to the bridegroom. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. You have to stop attaching yourself to the bride and getting your expectations from her and just saying, God, I'm here to serve you. It's our calling to simply prepare the way for Jesus into people's hearts. Let Him become greater, and let's gladly become less. Can I finish with my last couple minutes from a quick story of Gettysburg? There's a man named Joshua Chamberlain. If you're not familiar with the story, just the really quick synopsis is, He was given charge to hold the far side of the Union line to guard against the enemy flanking the entire Union army, cutting them off from D.C., and could have likely ended the war and caused the United States to be split. And they told him, here's Joshua Chamberlain. In fact, he first went in to become a seminary student and didn't make it, and or decided to switch careers and became a teacher. And he served valiantly in Gettysburg, eventually getting a Medal of Honor. But he was in charge of the 20th Maine. He was a volunteer himself and had a lot of volunteers with him. But here's the point of why I share it with you tonight. They told him, you need to go to the far end of the line. And the man that gave him the command said, you must hold that line at all costs. And so they get to the point late in the last day of day 2 of the battle, and they literally have no bullets left. And it's not normal for the Union Army to charge. That was what the Southern Army did, but the Northern Army did not do that. But because they had no bullets, but he had been given an assignment, you must hold the line. He told all of his men to fix bayonets, and they did what was not normal and was not comfortable, and he said, I want you to charge down the hill. And they said, we have nothing, we have no bullets. What do you mean? He says, we have to hold the line, so we will give our life to this. And they charged down that hill, and they caught the enemy by such surprise that they retreated. They captured most of them. And many historians will tell you when they take you there that literally the United States could be what it is today because of the courage of this man to hold the line. Can I challenge all of us today to hold the line by being faithful to our calling? It's time, like David, for some of us to renew our vows. The enemy wants to take you out, wants to convince you to quit or to convince that you were never called. And I want us to do that tonight, almost to recommit ourselves like we would do at a wedding. Would you stand to your feet with me? We've done this if you're a pastor, right? You've done weddings. But now let's do this for ourselves before the Lord and recommit ourselves to Him and His calling in our life. Just like we lead people in these little vows. I'm in this for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, until death do us part. Stay faithful to your calling and hold the line. You know, if we had time, I would show you more statistics because Barna says there's an openness in people's hearts right now that is unprecedented. And there's an openness among a young generation that is unprecedented. Why do you think right now the enemy wants to convince all of us to give up our calling and to quit? Because there is an openness to what God is doing. And the only way for that not to happen is for us to walk away and not hold the line. So we've been singing this song in our church this year, focused on consecration, and I just want to lead us in a response. It's called Strip Everything Away. Maybe you close your eyes with me. Let's just come back to the simplicity, to the basics. God, strip away all the pain, the wounding, the hurt, and the offenses that we've had over the last several years. I mean it, God. We've chosen to lay down our lives. But God, we've been hurt and we have pain. Lord, strip away the anger and the frustration that we have. Pastors, leaders, I have good news for you. Dead people don't get angry. That's why Jesus said to deny yourself, to literally die to yourself. Because dead people don't get angry. Dead people don't retaliate because they don't have anything to retaliate against. Jesus said, no one can take my life from me because I've already laid it down. God, strip away all the expectations. All the titles, all the pressure, all the fear, all the failure, all the false motivations, so that we can remember, Jesus, that you just called us to follow you and to serve you. Dead people don't need to impress. Dead people don't worry about failure. Oh, what freedom and joy that both David and John the Baptist talked about. When everything is stripped away, he becomes greater and I become less. So as we sing this song, you know, I had a picture in my mind, and you may want to do this tonight. You can if you'd like, but I imagine some of you coming to the altar just like you did on a wedding day, perhaps. and just renewing your vows before God today, that I will hold the line. I will not give up my calling. I will trust you and believe in you. You can do that from your seat. You can do it from up front, but can we renew our vows to the things that God has called us tonight? In Jesus' name.